Thanks, Theo, for the introduction. So I'm going to reintroduce myself again. My name is Mtha Ndlovu, and I'm a product designer at KMC, which is Khabane Majestic Consulting, which is a software development company. So today we're going to talk about web accessibility. Second, and fast forward to when you reach your 89th birthday and you're surfing the internet, right? What would that picture look like? So for example, our eyesight and hearing deteriorates, we may even get arthritis, and our memory is affected too. Take a second as well and ask yourself, how does Stevie Wonder navigate through the apps on his phone? What is web accessibility? Web accessibility is the inclusive practice of ensuring that there are no barriers that prevent interaction with or access to websites by people with disabilities. So in practice, this mostly means that ensuring that screen reader software can access and interact with all the content that is in place on an application. So we do need to think in the long term about what we're building and equip ourselves to design for a diverse audience with a wide range of needs. We should design with accessibility in mind right at the beginning. It does take a little bit of some extra forethought and planning, but it does save you a lot of work down the road. Empathy does allow you to respond to changes in a meaningful and impactful way. When applications are correctly designed, developed, and edited, generally all users have equal access to information and functionality. If we were to speak of different kinds of impairments, these might be visual, hearing, mobility, and cognitive impairments. So for example, that would be color blindness, low vision, cognitive impairments such as Down syndrome, or even a parent with a baby in arm is also considered as a disability when using a digital device. So what are the numbers like, right? So over 48% of people globally have some sort of a disability, including at least 2.8 million people in South Africa. That's quite a huge number. So in order to create usable software, we need to follow the PAW principle. P stands for perceivable, meaning that information and UI components must be presentable to users in ways they can perceive. O for operable. User interface components and navigation must be operable. Understandable. Our information and operation of the user interface must be understandable. R for robust. Content must be robust enough that it can be interpreted by a wide range of user agents, including assistive technologies. So for example, when you're building a website, right, it should be usable across all browsers instead of telling your users only to use a specific browser to access that application. So to create a compelling business case, it's important to highlight the key accessibility benefits. There are both tangible and intangible benefits to business that dedicate resources to digital accessibility. So for example, customers will be able to find your site more easily, good SEO. Developing to standard reduces bugs and costs of integrating with other systems as well. Aging populations also have money to spend, right? And will come to your site over the less accessible, less usable competition. And lastly, people with disabilities won't spend if they have difficulty accessing your site. We should ask ourselves then, have we included people with disabilities in our software development process? Are they even mentioned in our discovery meetings? So the Web Accessibility Initiative brings together people from industry, disability organizations, government, and research labs around the world to develop guidelines and resources to help make the web accessible. So according to WCAG, which stands for the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, the top 1 million of websites in 2021 have accessibility issues. So a CAG picked up the most popular sites had issues with low contrast texts, missing alternative texts, empty links, missing form labels, missing document language even, and also empty buttons. Right, so let's have a look at some of these issues in greater detail. First of all, it's good practice to give images a text equivalent. The alternative text attribute will be read out via a screen reader so as to help visually impaired users. So for example, a screen reader would read this image as a cute dog wearing a sweater and a hat. Also, alternative text must be meaningful and must serve an effective substitute for the image in a way that makes sense to users who are blind. If the information in an image is purely decorative or redundant with content on the page, the alternative text should be an empty. Let's talk about languages now. If you just put the language attribute on top of your HTML, you're pretty much sorted. And if the page is not in English, you can use the tag for any other language as well. But I think a lot of us English speakers are prone to forgetting that English is not the default language. So one of the ways that this actually helps assistive technologies as well is with things like pronunciations when reading the content out loud, because the pronunciation or the meaning of a word can change quite significantly depending on the language. So how do we make sure that the products we build are ethical and inclusive for all? Visually impaired users find the way around the web by using assistive technologies such as screen readers or braille keyboards. In some instances, if the person has limited vision, a screen magnifier plugin can be used, or they can just simply zoom in the page by using our default control or command plus minus controls. So us designers and developers can use the Chrome Vox screen reader browser plugin, or the built-in voiceover on the Mac, and the NVDA on Windows. A visually impaired person can move focus around the page by using the tab key for moving the focus forward, Shift tab to move the focus backwards. Arrow keys can be used to navigate inside the component. So in this example image, we see 3 examples of color blindness. The first frame shows how normal sighted users see the screen. The second is the absence of the color green, and the third being the absence of blue. And the fourth frame shows how a person with tunnel vision sees. So as designers, we can add annotations to our designs so as to show the expected flow, function, and page regions for keyboard and screen reader users. This helps ensure that the design intentions are clear to the developers. This example image, blue markers are used to indicate the object's focus order and indicate how these elements will receive focus state. If the reading order is illogical, the content will not make sense, or it will be difficult to navigate or understand. So we could use ARYA. ARYA, which stands for Accessible Rich Internet Applications, can also define roles for significant page regions and landmarks. These are identified by screen readers and help with orientation and navigation within the page. So if a role is used more than once on a page, the ARYA label attribute should also be used in the order to distinguish between the 2 regions. States communicate the status of UI elements to the user. Each state should have clear affordances that distinguish it from other states and the surrounding layout. We should use the use of labels or instructions with form fields and instructions. Avoid placeholders and use labels and hint messages instead. We shouldn't use color alone, to make critical information understandable. And also, we should give users correction cues within the error messages for specific inputs or other controls. And lastly, we should always support keyboard navigation. So let's have a look at the following video demos and see how we can pick up some of these accessibility issues. We will learn how to check for color contrast, simulate color blindness, and also take note of other potential accessibility issues. In this first video, the Able accessibility plugin is used in Figma. We see a data table with cell content and a pill badge component indicating different statuses for each row. We'll select the row background and select the light gray text layers from the row. And then once we open the Able plugin from the menu, we can see that the contrast ratio is failing, as indicated in the video. You could also simulate different modes of color blindness for that selected layer. We could also test out the pill badge's contrast. And when we do, we see that the contrast does meet the accessibility standards indicated by AAA and AA. And we toggle through the different colorblind modes. In the second video, we'll be using whocanuse.com, which is an online contrast checker. You can input different hex codes for background and text colors and switch between the two. So when you input a light gray color, we can see on the right-hand side that the gray on white background combo will fail the WCAG grading. Also, we can see how different types of visually impaired users will be affected by the combination, as well as direct sunlight and night mode, as indicated at the bottom of the video. Cool. So when we input a darker gray color against the white background, we see that the results changes, and this time it passes to a AA. And all types of visually impaired users will be able to see that contrast much better. And in the last demo video, we'll use Firefox Developer Edition to audit the Notion website. We'll use the built-in browser inspect mode and use the UxDevTools plugin to find other issues with the site. So when you right-click and select the Inspect Accessibility Properties, you will see a panel where you can select different parts of the website individually and check for other issues such as contrast, keyboard, text labels. You can simulate colorblind modes and also show tabbing order. When I select the tab order, you can see the tab order being indicated on the screen. And when I press tab, it goes straight into the input field. When I press shift tab, it goes back into the navigation. Cool. We can also use the UxDevTools for testing. And we can scan the page. And when we do scan the page, we're going to come up with some results. So we found a total of 44 issues with this page. And when we highlight on each of these issues, we can see the exact component that is affected. In this case, you can see the microcopy is failing the accessibility contrast, but also it also gives you hints as to how you can fix some of these issues. There's always a helpful string of text that you can help fix all these issues on. Also, you can see images, alternative text. So in this case, the hero image on top does have an alternative text. But then when we look at the other issues with the images, right, when you scroll down, the images do show that they don't have alt text. When we highlight the image, it will show that the accessible text is empty. Same applies for the images that follow along down the screen. They don't have any alt text. Okay, cool. Developers don't just wake up in the morning and say, I'm gonna go to work and build a system that excludes 20% of the population, right? So in actual fact, teams create inaccessible software because they don't even know that this is something they need to pay attention to. There are some transformation practices that can be adopted at a company-wide level. So for example, accessibility coaches can perform audits on new UI functionality with the purpose of bringing these results back to the team and help identify areas of improvement. So successfully adopting agile accessibility will require a large amount of change in behavior throughout the whole organization. This can be done by executing an empathy program to drive awareness, access to high-quality base of up-to-date accessibility information, examples, courses, is a good starting point. You can also form a team of accessibility coaches to coach agile teams. This training can be in-person, multi-day workshops, or even on-demand online learning. Teams can create an accessibility dashboard to measure the progress of change and report to stakeholders. In order to understand how to design and implement for accessibility, you need to understand how users interact with devices. However, it will be impossible to list how every user interacts with devices. There are three approaches that we could use. The first approach would be you could add accessibility requirements to your acceptance criteria. You can create specific stories for disability user types. And the last option would be creating broad stories for all users with disabilities. So if we're going to use option one, if your user story references a save button, for example, you may wish to consider adding accessibility requirements to acceptance criteria. Like for example, the user story would read, as a specific user type, I want to save my work function so that I can achieve a specific benefit. The acceptance criteria for that would be the save button must be in a color that is high contrast with its background. The save button must have an accessible label. The save button must be focusable. And the save button must be keyboard accessible. Using the same example for option two, you may wish to consider adding accessibility requirements to your user-specific acceptance criteria. Like for example, the user story would be, as a blind user, I want to save my work so that I can achieve a specific benefit. Acceptance criteria will be the save button, for example, the save function, for example, the button must have an accessible label. For example, label 4 in quotes, or ARYA label is equals to save your work, or other semantically programmatical association. So another user story would be, as a deaf user, I want to save my work so that I can achieve a specific benefit. The ACs for that would read, if the save button provides audible indication of save status, for example, a visual warning on save error, audible confirmation of save, then the system must also provide a visual indication of the same status notification. And the last option would be number 3. You may wish to consider adding accessibility requirements to the user stories. Like for example, the user story would be, as an individual with a disability, I want to be able to have an accessible experience on the system so I can fully take advantage of all the features and functions. ACs would be, the programmatic tab order must match the visual tab order. All graphical elements must have alt text, and all headings must be marked programmatically and in the correct hierarchy. For example, using the H1, H2, H3 HTML tags. So regardless of which option we use, right, the goal is to ensure that accessibility requirements are incorporated in our user stories and ACs, just as you would for any other requirements, for example, for functional requirements, security, performance requirements, or any other external interface. So just take a moment and imagine trying to add electrical wiring and plumbing to a building after the building is finished and all of the interior design is in place. Where would you even begin, for example? you're going to have to tear apart the walls and force things to fit where they don't even, where they weren't even supposed to be designed to fit. So designing accessible products is good for the business because it shows that you care about people. So we as software teams must make sure that we incorporate accessibility in the beginning of the process, not at the end. A fully inclusive world is going to involve collaboration, legislation, and the realization that we should build products that can be used by all people, because that is our social responsibility. Thank you very much for your time. You can follow me on Twitter or LinkedIn. Please feel free also to get in touch with me on my email. That is mtha@khabane.co.za. And you can learn more about KMC on our website, www.khabane.co.za. Thank you very much.
Mtha, thank you for that absolutely awesome talk. I saw Makaziwe responding there in the comments. Lots of good feedback. I think many people in agreement with the information that you've positioned in your talk. So
Okay.
thank you again. It's definitely important that we need to, consider accessibility and usability more,
Yes.
not just the visuals and the functional side of things.
Yes.
We've
Cool.
got some we've got some questions for you.
Okay.
So the first question is from Makaziwe. Um, where does one start attempting to make a large-scale legacy system accessible? Any tips?
Wow. Okay. So I think the tip there is that you need to sit very closely with the users of that legacy system, right? And then find out what are the issues that they're facing, as well as whilst that is happening, you should also involve the developers within the process and the researchers as well, so that you gather as much information as possible as you can. But most importantly, we should always involve people who have impairments or disabilities, because those are the actual users that we need to sit the closest to and listen to their feedback. I think that's one way of addressing that.
Thank you for that. That answered the question, Makaziwe. The next question. Um, why do you think some companies are still not designing for accessibility? I'm assuming here, taking into consideration. Um,
Okay, cool. Yeah, that's a very good question. And a lot of companies are very guilty, especially the big corporations, right? They don't design for accessibility because they don't think it's a priority. They've never been next to a user who has impairments, so they wouldn't know what actual problems disabled people go through when they're using an application or a website. So it's a lack of empathy, I'd say, from the top management all the way down to the last member in the software development team. So it's everyone's job to come together and realize the importance behind implementing accessibility within an organization.
Thank you. Thank you for that.
Cool.
And then we have one more question, and this is from Candice. If there are any more questions, please add them to the list. So the next question is, have you come across clients that still are not interested in commitments to accessibility despite your business case points?
Yes, that's very true, right? So some companies or some clients are still very hard-headed. They wouldn't buy into it, right? But it's also important. For example, you can develop a small feature that does address accessibility issues, right? And then present that to them and see how they respond to that, because you're showing them the actual benefits of having a system that is accessible. So I hope that answers your question there.
Thank you. Thank you for that. I hope that answers the question, Candice. Um, just maybe let's give it a few more seconds just to check if there are any other questions from anyone else.
All right.
I think more and more accessibility needs needs to be considered. I think
Yes.
that's fundamental.
Yes, very true. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think there's any more questions. So if you one more.
Yeah.
Do we have a case study, or do you have a case study on how not designing for accessibility affects companies' bottom line?
I don't have a direct case studies, but there are some case studies that have been written by, for example, Apple, for example, or how they have implemented accessibility and how it has benefited them. Another example is, for example, there's a survey that happens every year where all these big banks globally are vetted as to how good their systems are in terms of accessibility, in terms of how can a customer create an account if they have a disability. How easy is that process, right? So there are quite a number of case studies online you can have a look at, but I can't bring them at the top of my head right now. But I'll be happy to reply you on email.
Please. I mean, you could even tweet it at us, and then we'll retweet it.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay. Cool.
So we've got one more question, and this is
Okay.
from Seth. How would you
Yep.
quantify the business value of accessibility?
Quantify. Okay. So one way of quantifying that is, as I mentioned before, is having a dashboard that addresses accessibility, right? So within that dashboard, you can measure all the activities and the success of that, right? And then you can create a report based on that dashboard, and you can also have a comparison between the dashboard and when your system was not implementing accessibility. And you can compare the two and see the differences that happen between that.
Thank you. I hope
Cool.
that answers the question, Seth. Mtha, thank you
Cool.
so much for an awesome, insightful talk.
Thank you
I
so much.
think,
Thanks for having me on this platform.
thank you. I mean, if there are any more questions, like I said, everyone, please reach out to Mtha. I'm happy to share his details.